rooms for it to dry out.
Doesn't matter, you're still a shelter.
You can guarantee me that?
Here we go.
Bob out in the lobby? You know? Bob?
Oh, there he is.
And Audrey? Mm-hmm. There we go.
Coffee club.
It was good. Yeah, he got.
No.
Okay, the last item on the agenda here is an ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs creating the Bonita Springs Homeless Shelter Operational Use Permit. So why don't we get into that?
Okay. And this ordinance is, again, it's explained in the green sheet, and this is the one we went over last month with very specific detail. So the changes were made that were recommended by Rhodsell and Andrus in the document. Hopefully I made them to their satisfaction. I'll find out later if I did or didn't. We have new whereas clauses to try to balance it and explain what we're doing. We, some of the other change, you know, as far as it being a significant expense and how to deal with it, some of the other changes, and I didn't summarize all the changes in the document, and I don't believe I did color changes in this one. It has it as modified based on their comments last time. So if you have any questions, let me know. What I'll do is once I have it, because this is a brand new ordinance, it will not have the cross-outs and underlines, but instead it'll be a clean version the next time I have a draft of this. Finally, so maybe it is the cleanest version at this point. The final point is shelter size occupancy. That is something that is still a subject of debate. I think that will always be a subject of debate. I think nobody will ever know how big or how many. You know, trying to get a handle on the population is not something that is easy. But, you know, we have the language in there, and there are 3 options for City Council's consideration, with legal recommending the highlighted section. This is on page 8. And that's it. When I revised the draft, I believe it was about February 1st, I sent out a memorandum, and you have a copy of that memorandum, to all the different stakeholders. What's interesting, again, is Mr. Schropp, representing Liberty Youth Ranch, not on the homeless operational, but on the Land Development Code, may have some comments, because Liberty Youth Ranch, one of our zoned facilities, would be under a social service group. It used to be Group 3, it's now Group 4, I believe.
Group 4.
If you have questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Just for point, are we looking at 029 or 030? I have
029, I believe.
030 is the real thick guy.
Yeah, 029. 030 was the...
29.
Yeah, it's 029.
Okay.
29. You looked at 030
Yeah.
first, which was the Land Development Code
Okay.
provisions. The operational was drafted, and I have requested staff also to provide council with a listing of all the various ordinances that they've looked at. They looked at ordinances in the state of Florida, North Carolina, California. They can probably give a better detail of all the different places to try to figure out the different areas, different things that are being done throughout. I can answer questions. We've gone over this ordinance multiple times.
Yeah, I think we have some
Well,
questions.
something
Rex.
has been added, Mr. Chairman, and I guess clear in my mind on page 8, your alternate there, what are we going to use as a definition here? A or the shaded in area?
You're talking about the occupancy?
Yes.
It's really a choice of council to choose any of those 3 options for their number A. The staff recommendation, I believe staff and legal are at the same recommendation, which is that homeless shelters will be limited to a maximum of 30 facilities at any one facility. That does imply that it's a possibility to have more than one facility inside the city if there is a need. The first one.
And that excludes the children as a count?
Correct.
Okay, that, in my mind, fits our need better than the first one. Because we excluded children, and we were afraid that when we get involved with families, that would be, because in the beginning we said, well, it was 30, and when you got to 30, that was all over. But I think we're kind of limiting our scope here.
Right.
So,
Now, A, there's three As. The first one, both the first one and the second one of A exclude children under age 6. One creates the finite, we will allow one facility, whoever is first to find a facility will get to be the pleasure of going through this ordinance. Anybody else is out of luck.
Now, yeah, you listed here that's a homeless shelter resident per 1,500 residents. Now, that would not include the seasonal people here, or would it? Because they basically go at 45,000, I think, is our account. And so you could use that number, or you could use 75,000
Right,
in
I think the
season.
44 is what, we were, Carl and I were, the city manager and I were talking about Bieber, and I think we would use probably the Bieber estimate as the actual count.
And and if you assume 44,000, what would that be?
I think it's
30?
29 something, or 27 something.
That'd be 30, pretty close to 30.
3 times
Right.
15 is 45,
So it's-
yeah.
And I think that was a question that came up earlier is, what are we counting? And I guess the reason for the seasonal count would be because of people that would come here from out of state that are homeless. And I don't know if that's really in the count of seasonal people or not. But you could
But
certainly.
that's up to the council to decide from one of the three
Yes.
choices, correct?
Right.
Now, this board, though, could make a recommendation, a specific recommendation to the city council. So if we decide that one of these should be A, then we could do so.
Right, and I could do that. I mean, I put legal, this is what we feel is the most rational relationship, but nothing's wrong with saying LPA choice is the second
Right.
one, or the third one, or the first one.
Well, yeah. I would make a comment, if they're gonna get to choose from these, the one that says one bed per 1,500 residents needs to have a comma, but in no case shall exceed 30 beds per facility, which kind of gets you back to the same thing.
why would why would you say one for 1,500 if you, in the first sentence, you say one for 1,500, and in the second sentence you say, but it doesn't
Yeah, you're
apply?
Well, because that would give you the justification if, like, we jump to hypothetically 90,000, then that would give you the rationale for saying 2 shelters, 30 beds in each facility, but on different sites. I mean, that'd be what you'd lead yourself to.
But another provision in here talks about the maximum being the 30.
Right.
Or I'm sorry, this is the maximum being 30.
I think we should stick with the 30.
Yeah, I mean, if they're gonna go with the gray one anyway, because legal counsel, that's their recommendation, and,
We would like that, to think that, but that's not always the case.
well, I think,
Still, they
And I
will make
will
the choice.
modify the second one to say homeless shelters will be, or the third one, will be permitted based on a ratio of one homeless shelter per resident per 1,500 permanent residents, and put into parentheses excluding seasonal residents.
And
Okay.
and you can also say that would be per shelter.
Sorry?
In other words, the count is per shelter. So that if you have a growth to 90,000, you don't grow that shelter
right,
to take into account maybe another 60 people.
right.
It'd be one shelter. In other words, another shelter would have to be
Right.
built because of that count.
But it's limited to 30. The 30 is the
Right.
drop dead count.
That's right.
So
The magic number is 30
that
per-
seems to be the magic number. It's just, in my mind, I need to get a handle on the 30 is a magic number, but how do we account for children?
Well,
Yeah.
and the bottom one does not count for children.
Right, and that bothers me a whole lot. So I think someplace under here, we've got to have some method where we can have 30 as a drop dead, but we've also, if a mother comes in and she's number 30, and we say, well, you can come in, but you can't bring your kid, there's something wrong here. So let's have.
Did have it to read at any one facility, again excluding, now that brings the population, or has a potential of an increase on, well, it probably is okay. So you still have excluding the children. In other words, homeless shelters will be permitted on a ratio of one homeless shelter resident per 1,500 residents, excluding seasonal population, limited to a maximum of 30 residents at any one facility, excluding children under age 6.
That kind of covers it.
Yeah, it really covers it.
Does that sound? Bob?
I was Bob Pritt with Retzel and Andrews. I spoke enough at the last meeting, so I'll try to keep it very short.
Thank you.
I had problems with this 1 per 1,500 residents and recommended that you find out what the need is. And you've taken some steps, the staff has taken some serious steps to find out what the need is, and we heard all about that this morning. The reason we think that option number 2 is the most sustainable is because it would be the result, the product of the work that is being done to try to identify the real need.
Right.
If you do it based upon 1 per so many residents, that doesn't take into account whether you're an upscale community, a downscale community, how big you are. You know, a lot of things just don't go into that. You've actually gone a step further, and the recommendation would still be that you use the product of that information, which, by the way, I think there was a lot of discussion about that this morning. I think that a federal judge reviewing this would look at figures that HUD would accept long before they'd look at figures you try to generate yourselves. So keep that in mind, and the recommendation, strong recommendation, is you go with 1 or 2, and really 2 is probably the most sustainable.
Thank you, that was helpful.
That was the reason.
I was just going to say, wouldn't it be helpful to city council if we went on record endorsing the shaded in one?
I was just getting ready to recommend, what is the board, would
Yeah, I
like
think
to
it'd be good.
recommend?
I'd go along with
Let
that,
me
too.
Make that motion.
Yeah. I'll second it.
We'll shoot for the shaded one here.
We'll call it item 2.
Item 2, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be very favorable to me.
Let me ask a question related to the
Do we
30
need to
here.
vote on
And I'm
that?
going to make that just the final recommendation, because
You-
at that point, I think, at that point, we can make that a final.
We could incorporate it in our final motion.
Yay.
Yes, that would
That
be.
makes life easier for me,
in
too.
Next week,
Right.
I think. Let me comment here on the 30 residents as it relates to, in the social services supplementary recommendations, it talks about this number 16, but if you want to have more than that, it is a PD. And that's what this would be relating to in the operations. Is that correct?
And operational would have to go and become a plan development, yes.
Yeah. So the 16, that's in there. Why is that in there?
16 is the magic number under state statute. And there's a whole nother zoning code out there that's not locally operated, it's state operated for community residential homes. Ms. Gallagher was on point when she said, you know, chapter 419, because both chapter 419 and there's another chapter, I think it's 393, has different regulations, and we're preempted from doing regulations on the folks under 16.
Right.
So that's a magic
Okay.
number to us.
Mr. Chairman, does that number change as things change in the state? Is this a fixed number, or does it change according to population?
16?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's relatively, it's interesting, because 16 is the max on the state issue, but there's several numbers in there, because
Page
you have
17.
homes under 6 people, homes under 16 people, 16 being the greatest amount, 6 being more common. 6 is where you're allowed to put in any neighborhood, and we're preempted from ever regulating. You know, if let's say, Mr. Thinnis in his neighborhood had a home next door to him, suddenly become a home for disabled adults, you know, and they had 4 disabled adults and a caregiver, that would be something that we could not regulate, we could not prohibit, as well as his homeowners association could not regulate or
I
prohibit.
wondered where that came from.
Yeah.
Well, Audrey, as we look at that, on page 17 of the Green Sheet 30, when you look at that, number 1 says new facilities of 50 beds or more, but that relates to, regards use regulations for community facilities districts. You know,
What page, Sam?
that's 17 of 55.
Oh, the other one.
And I need to point out, we do have a facility that meets that number, and that is Liberty Youth Ranch. Now, for footnote 1 applies to healthcare facilities.
Correct. And then you also have under 1 and 2 family residential districts, it's footnote 2, for 50 beds or more. And
Oh, you're gonna make my life. Those are, right, adult living facility, or, Jackie? Assisted living? That's note 1 for 14,
yeah, and see that occurs again under the use of, it's almost in all of them under conventional commercial districts. So that number will come up, I think, throughout the use regulations. And
there's a couple numbers that are magic numbers there.
yeah, but that does not relate to the homeless shelter
No,
number
sir.
at all. Okay.
That's what's in the if it's not underlined in this
Okay.
part, in the zoning, it's the existing language.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the green sheet 29 here relating to homeless shelters?
Yeah, I have one. This would be a question that I'm sure special counsel or Audrey need to answer, and that is,
I need to hear better.
when I looked at this again, it looked like the requirement that, that the operator was supposed to let the sheriff's department know whenever new applicants had shown up, so that they could do the little thing of, is there any outstanding warrants? Has that disappeared? And I'm sure if it has, it's for some legal reason.
I hope it disappeared.
Yeah, I don't think we, that might have been something that was requested, that might have gone in the initial disappearance when I did my first review.
Okay.
Now, it does not mean that a shelter operator is not going to work cooperatively with law enforcement to make sure that the people live there are
It's just
satisfactory.
it's just the city can't require it.
Asking them to actually do stuff is a whole nother going into,
Any more than a tail could be put on you by the sheriff for doing any lawful activity that you might be engaged in. Because we have to remember that we cannot assume that every one of these people that go into a homeless shelter have committed a crime. As a matter of fact, that's one of the biggest sources of litigation in federal courts as to whether or not they have done anything that's wrong, that's illegal. So we can't assume that they're criminals.
That item was originally included because that's how St. Matthew's House claims to operate in Collier County, and it was incorporated from some of their management techniques into this document.
right, and just because a shelter, and that's a great point, because if you remember, we had a citizen come up here multiple times telling us this is how they do it in St. Pete, or I think it was St. Pete, and there was one facility, and I remember looking up the facility and such. I'm happy the facility operates, and those were a tent city too, which is a little strange, but that the facility operates and says that they operate certain ways, but at the government, as the government actor, telling somebody you have to act that way, that is a very far leap. You know, so just because somebody does something doesn't mean the government should tell people they have to do it that way.
As we look at the document, looking on page 3, intake process and evaluation, there were some very good things added and deleted here in F is very interesting, that any applicant who is designated a sexual predator under Florida statutes, is not permitted to reside in the shelter unless the applicant's civil rights has been restored. But it deletes all the items we had listed previously.
Yeah, but they're pretty much still in there because in addition to sexual predator, or has been convicted of a crime as specified in Florida statute 775.084 1B1A through, and that should be the letter O. I better make sure that reads as an O. Because that looks like the number O. Are not allowed in the shelter. And I can read those out to you if you want.
That point amazes me because here we've been specific in identifying that person, and yet technically that person could be driving an ice cream truck in our city right now,
Being a
and we
teacher.
don't have any way of knowing that. I mean, that's really kind of what bothers me. We've identified them as eliminating them from our shelter process. But when we discussed the food vendor thing earlier, that person could be a food vendor running all over town selling ice cream to the kids. And we don't know that, and we have no way of knowing it.
Let me tell you what the statute is. The statute that I'm citing there is for violent career criminals.
Maybe we ought to put a chip in them.
So the type of crimes that are listed there, I want to make sure I got the right list because there's several lists here. 1 second. B1. I believe it's the list that includes arson, sexual battery, robbery, kidnapping, aggravated child abuse of an elderly person or disabled adult, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, murder, manslaughter, aggravated manslaughter of an elderly person or disabled adult, aggravated manslaughter of a child, unlawful throwing, placing, or discharging of a destructive device or bomb, armed burglary, aggravated battery, aggravated stalking, aggravated stalking. None of those particular people you'd want near you.
I know. Right.
But that's the reason, I mean, all this was stricken through.
Yeah.
That's correct, that goes out.
And as Audrey has said, a lot of these that you have may be under-inclusive. You have treason, that'd be kind of interesting. But a lot of these that have been in 1 through 18 are covered already, and some that are not even in here are covered. So the way that this is being done is, I think, a little bit better. Keeps you from forgetting something, and make sure that you cover everything you want to cover.
Right.
And these are people who are considered habitual violent felony offenders. I mean, if you've committed these type of violent, things, these are the top bad guys.
Right.
Yeah, aircraft piracy. I'm not even sure what that is. I mean, I think I understand, but if you steal an aircraft, I guess, is that like carjacking?
Well, here's an example, manslaughter, somebody who may have been DUI and wound up in a fatal accident. Well, is that manslaughter? Yes, it's manslaughter. Is it aggravated manslaughter? It may or may not be. I mean, so rather than trying to get into the details of each of these, I think the reference that was made probably covers about most of the same things, but still is a little more generic.
Right.
Slaughter's still on the list.
I think she did a nice job at cleaning that up. Thank you.
Did a lot of criminal law research. I had fun doing. It's been a
bet.
long time since I've looked at criminal law.
Better
like
you
that.
than me.
I like criminal.
Okay, I'm just looking through to see if I have anything underlined I want to ask about. In the requirement here under the site maintenance plan, you talk about floor plans of the facility, and it's just a dimension layout. I'm wondering if a layout of the beds would be better than looking at square footage per occupant.
What page are you on, sir?
Hmm?
What page are you on?
I'm on page 11 of 16.
What number?
Number 8.
Right, we have a floor plan of facility where they're supposed to give a dimensional layout of the proposed area.
The reason being is that sometimes I find in drawing these plans up is not sufficient to show that 30 beds fit in a certain area or how the facility will be designed.
Well, it does say,
Why is that government business, though?
Hmm?
Why is that getting into government? I mean, what if they want, my
I understand what
biggest,
you're saying.
yeah, my
yes.
biggest fear I can imagine is they propose a plan where the beds are to follow feng shui, or is that the right pronunciation? A certain way, and then when they actually build, they orient it another way, and if somebody wants me to have a permit pulled, that they're in violation of their floor plan.
In relation to that, we do the same thing, I think, with bars and restaurants that want to locate
We have
outdoors.
seat requirements,
Yeah, we have requirements that cause us to want to look at the layouts, and I don't know if this will be helpful or not. And staff will be taking a look at this, so you might,
Well, your
Wonder.
fire codes are going to say a lot about where beds can be, I would think.
Right.
And how to get to the exits and things like that. I think that this is part of the building and fire
I think the fire
review.
code.
Anyhow, no matter what you guys look at, I think they're going to be looking at this.
that's true. And then the relationship, though, to the 250 square feet per, 250 per resident
Yeah, that came
here.
from my building official.
You see, that would come from the building code, and it would also come from the fire marshal's code. And depending on taking into account the means of egress, that either changes or it remains the same. So the number 250 could be in question. It may not be enough.
I'm going to add the fire marshal as one of the people to review this next time.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I've run across instances where you've had a situation where there was a certain amount of parking required based on square footage,
Right,
and a fire marshal comes in and he's looking at something totally different,
right.
and you wind up with a conflict with occupancy versus what can actually happen on the site. And he's based it on exiting components, that type of design standards. So I think it's important that we make sure that the fire marshal
Well, also,
needs to communicate, and there
Right.
needs to be that element of,
with the fire marshal, in terms of when you design a restaurant, for example, you must have 3 feet clear between tables. And if you use square footage, you don't know whether or not you have the clearances for those types of things, but the fire marshal does look at that. So perhaps something added that would say the fire marshal must look at the plan to assure that we have a proper means of egress and so forth. I don't have any further comments. Does it, any of the board members?
no, good.
Okay. If not, we can move on to public comments for this particular section.
Hi, I'm Deb McLean with the Banana Peel, and I'd like to remind you that the intent of the operating ordinance is to prevent a small group with leftist leanings from establishing a social malignancy of homeless shelters in our small seaside resort retirement community. And my idea of taking photographs is because photographs don't lie about identity and the people can be counted correctly. And since I spoke last here today, I realized that we hire the sheriff the number of deputies we need as needed, and we could hire additional deputies for a specific task to count the homeless with photographs. And that would be a tremendous asset that special counsel could not disagree with. It would be not an advocacy group, because I'm sure they don't advocate homeless. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Next item on the agenda is the next meeting, 3/14. Is that okay with you?
Okay, and you'll get the ordinance one last time, or you'll get both
Oh.
ordinances one last time during the advertisement process. So I think you're done with your charged duties of preparing the ordinance. So
Great.
your next part of it is you'll review it one more time for
One more time,
consistency,
yes.
and that'll
Hard
be in
to
between the
believe.
two public
Right.
hearings.
You did a great job here, Audrey. Thank you very much. And the staff, I'd like to thank for all of this. And
Hired folks too.
the attorneys that have been hired to help us with this. Thank you very much.
So the next meeting's on the 14th of,
Right, 14th of March.
Just makes it for my crew.
At 08:30?
At 08:30.
Yes.
And the approval of the minutes.
I move
I'd
the
make a motion they be approved.
second.
Motion's been approved. And we'd now like to adjourn. Thank you very much.
I'll make a motion.